And we are now live public on YouTube.
Great. Thank you, Trevor. And it looks like we're at the top of the hour, so we can go ahead and kick off the group conversation. My name is Eric Brinkman. I am the product director for the dev section, and today is the dev section group conversation. You can find the link to the presentation in the group conversation doc. And Sid, it looks like you have the first question. Would you like to verbalize that?
Thank you. So I think it's kind of hard to add an issue to an epic and the other way around. We're charging people a lot of money for Ultimate and the epic functionality. I think to add an issue to an epic, you need the full URL, and to add an epic to an issue, there's not like search in a dropdown or like there is everywhere else. But I didn't check recently, so I want to make sure I'm still up to date, and I want to make sure it's on our radar.
Yep, that is on our radar. In fact, on slide 28, there's at least one of the issues that's directly related to that. In the middle column there in portfolio management. One of the things that a lot of our customers have, a lot of our users have problems doing is actually creating an issue from an epic. So not exactly what you're asking for, but it's really hard to do top-down planning in GitLab right now because you can't make an epic and then just quickly make a whole bunch of issues that are automatically attached to that epic. So we are working on that. We're going to make that something that's a reality in GitLab. And then we are also working on allowing changes to the epic issue relationship in the sidebar, making that a little bit easier as well.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for the question. While other questions come in, I'll take a second to talk through a few slides that are probably new to the group conversation because it's relatively new to the product department. So starting on slide 14, we've started putting a lot of work into the one-year plan and 3-year strategy for each of the product sections. And so we've had a lot of work that's gone into each of these plans that all live on the /direction/section area of our handbook. And each of them have been reviewed with some of the execs. But basically the point of these documents is to highlight strategic themes that we're going to be paying attention to for the next 3 years. And as we always like to say, plans change. So this is, it's directional and it's where we think we'd like to go, but in the essence of core values, we're going to take a first step and then adjust over the next year. And so you can find the dev direction page as it currently exists here, which outlines our kind of 1-year and 3-year strategy. And then there's a few themes for each of the stages that I wanted to quickly highlight. So if you go to slide 15, you can see the manage 1-year plan themes. So over the next year, manage is going to be focused on making the product a little bit more ready for enterprises to adopt. Things like delivering on SSO integration, compliance features, compliance dashboards, audit logs, everything accessible through the UI, as well as the API. Lowering time to production for our customers via analytics, and then importing from some of the popular competing platforms that we have. The next slide outlines some of the plan themes. We want to be a drop-in replacement for Jira, or another way to put that is to import Jira without losing some of the required data that you would currently lose if you imported from Jira. Easy top-down planning, we talked about that a little bit. Enhancing the portfolio and project roadmaps. It's hard right now to use these features to do full-on portfolio management and then mapping these things all the way down to the sprint level. Reporting and analytics on your projects, as well as requirements management, which is something that Sid's talked about recently at his Brooklyn commit keynote. And then lastly, on slide 17, the create 1-year plan themes. We want to enhance the code review experience. We want to invest into making large files and Git just work, invest into our wiki a little bit, enable easier contributions to GitLab, and then make our editor experience better by potentially evaluating a container-based web IDE experience. Cool. Francis, while I was talking, looks like you put a question. So would you like to voice that over?
Yeah, hi, Eric. Thanks a bunch. I got to say, I'm super excited going through your slide deck and all the stuff that's coming soon from the dev section group, whatever it's called. Just like a lot of great stuff that we've been waiting for. My question is around analytics. In the sales process right now, I don't really talk about it very much. And one of the reasons is that things like cycle analytics seem to sort of depend on the whole end-to-end suite, which while we paint that as kind of an aspirational vision, in the enterprise, the focus tends to be on CI and SCM, sometimes only CI. And so my question is really like, what are we offering in terms of analytics that are going to be useful in the near term for those enterprise customers that are only adopting part of GitLab?
Yeah, that's a great question, Francis. Thanks so much. Virginia, are you on the call?
So I would say this is something that obviously I've been thinking about a lot. And to start with psychoanalytics, I think it's actually very important for us to at least get some of the timestamps data so that we can get that issue creation to engineering starting work in psychoanalytics. And I think it's not going to be that difficult because we already have an integration with Jira and we don't need that much to be able to import this information. So this is something on the roadmap. For the rest of what you were mentioning, basically people that don't necessarily want psychoanalytics, but more different sort of insights. We have something which is called code analytics, where one of our initial MVCs is basically code hotspots, but it's basically trying to look at the code base and seeing what are specific files that have been edited many times that can help with technical debt prioritization. We also have something that we just released actually in 12.3, which is focused on the time to merge requests. And this is kind of our single purpose drill down into some of the blockers that we say that will help you identify with psychoanalytics in the future. And this is something I think that people can already start giving feedback on. There are a couple of rough edges that we need to fix on that side, but I personally think that there is a lot that we can add on analytics even without psychoanalytics. There are many times, there are many questions that I receive around basically pipeline analytics and how we can correlate this with engineering productivity. There are also questions in terms of also surfacing more insights in terms of what we call basically DevOps score, but having a way to almost help teams rank engineers in terms of points that are important for them. For example, how much is an engineer adding to test coverage every single milestone? Is he detracting for it, or is he adding to it? How many incidents does he have related to him? Obviously, this is also dependent on people using issues or using monitoring, but we have a lot of ideas in mind. And I think my request is there. Obviously, there's such a huge scope that we can cover that we get basically customer ideas and interactions with which I can sense check some of those ideas and see what we can prioritize.
That's awesome. Thank you, Virginia.
Yeah, and Francis, I put a few links there. They're also in the presentation, but I put them into the agenda doc for some of the kind of customizable psychoanalytics that I think, maybe your customers might care a little bit more about.
Great, thanks, Eric.
You're welcome. Christopher, you're up. You want to verbalize your question?
Yeah, this is we get asked to ask tough questions. This tough question, so I don't know if we can answer necessarily in this forum, but I'd love to get some initial feedback, if so, from you, Eric. Basically, great vision of 3-year plan around features and functionality. One thing that I have gotten feedback anecdotally from a few engineering managers is around, feeling a little bit like the teams are pretty much deep in just feature development and our bug counts keep growing. Or I'll make a request, say, for a P2 or P3 to say, get it scheduled, and I'll be like, well, it'll be at least 3 months before we're even going to consider something like that. And that means our backlogs are busy, which is awesome. and good experience, but I'm just curious about how we're thinking about balancing that. You know, and some organizations call this tech debt, but how we're going to balance that kind of moving forward. And this is a tough problem because I don't want to over rotate to quality, but I also don't want us to forget it because it can get out. You know, it can become a truly big problem.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to give you an answer, and then I'm going to pass it over to Tim as well to help round out the answer. So the dev section is comprised of some of our more kind of mature, more feature complete stages and categories. And as such, they also have the highest usage, which means that they typically have the most bugs and the most kind of security related issues. So what you're saying is definitely correct, and that's called out in the plan, but it's not necessarily called out how we're going to fix that. But let me tell you at least one or two things that we've done in the recent past to help address that. So one of the things that we did a few months ago, and we highlighted this in the last group conversation, is we created a group in Manage called Import, which is focused on importers. But a big part of the reason we did that was because the rest of the managed groups had so many security and bug issues that it made sense to kind of load balance that across a third group. And when we created that third group, we also created additional engineering headcount to help with some of the throughput there. You know, in addition to some of the bugs and security stuff you mentioned, though, there are some other kind of big architectural changes I do think we need. For example, we'd love to get to, you know, real-time boards, but we need to refactor some of the front end code. We need to probably take a look at using WebSockets. And so there are some kind of big things that we need to do that will impact at least some of the plan next year in terms of feature functionality to take care of some of this stuff. Tim, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, I think there were already tons of very valid points, Eric. Thanks. One of the things is that what we have seen, especially over the last weeks, is that with those incoming topics around performance, especially exactly in those very high usage areas, is that we see much easier those performance topics is, first of all, fix that stuff as soon as possible. But this is, of course, rattling a little bit the prioritization and what is planned for that schedule, for that development cycle. So the other thing is really that we are taking a look at the mid and long-term solution for that. So really that engineers have a better understanding how their code is running beforehand. We have some really great initiatives around QA that is working on the 25K and even the 50K reference installation, so that we are really ahead of time there and bring back exactly that knowledge. But we also have done, I think 3-4 months ago, I was really taking a look at all the reports that were coming in around the security topics. Do we have new ones? Are they older ones? Are they from older code? The good news is they were mainly from a depth code, so really old stuff. But we are also trying all the time to improve all our tooling around it, so that we can improve, especially on those areas that cost us a lot of headaches or cost us a lot of overhead due to technical debt, that we reduce that, get rid of older stuff, and really focus on more the streamlined stuff through linters. But I think we have seen also good impact already with GraphQL, for example, that both front and backend teams really liked it, and we are standardizing this now. So I think there are a lot of different initiatives, but it's really up to the engineering managers, helping product managers understand what is happening in the technical debt and where can we invest to reduce the really most important ones, to improve stability, performance, bugs, perhaps catch 10 at the same time, and things like that, to have a really close relationship with the product managers and have a really good understanding what's happening to find the right balancing there.
Yeah, I think the last point here too is, as we go into fiscal year 2021 planning, Tim and I will be working very closely with you, Christopher, as well as Scott Williamson, VP of product, to make sure that we're adequately staffed to handle this while also maintaining a really high velocity on feature and functionality improvements.
Looking forward to that. Thanks for the answer.
Yeah, thanks for the question. William, would you like to verbalize your question?
Hey, Eric, yes. And what I love is there's been a bit of asynchronous answers in the doc, but for folks on the live stream, I'd love to just kind of share what our thoughts are in there. So I heard you talk earlier about some investments in a wiki. that piqued a bit of my interest because my impression was that that was not an area of investment for us, which I see your comment that says not an area of massive investment. And then my kind of follow-up question was, I saw in the vision we're aiming for, real-time WYSIWYG collaboration. And the follow-up question is kind of like, if we're aiming for real-time, can we do that without a lot of investment? And so I was wondering if you could just talk generally about, our plan for Wiki and your and the team thoughts around that.
I'm happy
Yeah.
to take this if you
go ahead, Kai.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I was gonna say, I've been closer to Wikis over the last few months since I came on board, and I'll tell you the create team split, and a knowledge group was created that took on design management and Wikis. And so for that knowledge group, the initial task and the thing that we were focused on getting out the door was design management. So that is where you've seen the knowledge team be invested in what they're focused on. I think we're getting to a point where there are many more customer conversations that I've been a part of, or that I see, or that's salespeople bring back to us. That is, hey, we want to replace Confluence. We're replacing everything else in our stack except we can't replace Confluence, or we can't replace some other tool that they're using. And I think what the market is telling us is basically that this is a very valuable tool in most organizations, and we haven't been there. And I think there was a Hacker News thread very recently that we got called out on it, and rightfully so, I think. And so I would say the next few releases, I think there's some big things, and not some big things. There's some things that we need to go do, right? The look and feel of wikis is not the same as the rest of GitLab. And if you actually look at the wikis, they are basically the same state they were 3, 4, 5 years ago when they were first introduced into GitLab. There's been very little improvement there. And so some of this is just like, we need to get it to a baseline similar level of functionality. And I think that's the slow drip of improvements that we're trying to make, and like slot those in while we finish up design management and really try and build on a strategy there. The next thing that has to happen is we've got to take a look at wikis and like the problems we want to go solve. I'll say the longest standing, most requested feature on GitLab is for a group level wiki. It's got the most upvotes. It's been around I think it's one of the oldest issues. And so we've got to do some serious thinking about that. And we've been trying to get that thinking in, to think about how we go and solve that for organizations that need wikis in a space where we haven't historically supported them. And so I would say real-time WYSIWYG collaboration, that is the vision, right? I think ultimately that is the state we want to get to. And I think that's the long-term goal, but there's a bunch of work that needs to happen before then. I'll also say that as of this week, there is a new PM that joined the Create team, specifically in Knowledge, who will be taking over for design management and wikis. And so, I think that's kind of the next step in making sure that we have an appropriate level of focus in terms of building out the depth in what we're doing there, right? Is making sure that there's an actual new DRI for design management and wikis. And so I think that's going to be beneficial to the space there too. So no, the slow drips aren't going to get us there, but we've got to start making improvements to get more people using the wiki. And I think if we want to go compete at the same space that Confluence is, where that's top of mind for most people when they think of these services, that's where we need to be looking.
Yeah, Kai, that is tremendous. I also saw the Hacker News thread, kind of sparked my questions. Really, really thoughtful answer. Unless Eric or ZJ or someone else wants to weigh in. It sounds like ZJ, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, quick one. Just could you, do you have any data on how much wikis are used right now? Yeah, just as a baseline, I guess.
I do not. We should be able, I would say that's a relatively easy data point to pull in terms of like number of projects with a wiki. By default, we don't create the homepage, so it would have required at least someone to go create a homepage. I'm not sure how useful that would be in terms of a data point, but we've never pulled the baseline number there. So
do we dog food wikis?
We do not. It is one of the it is an area that, because it lacks, I mean, you can tell we're doing this meeting, this group conversation happens in a Google Doc, right? And I think that is The reason is because there are, it looks like there's 85 people or 82 people in this document, and our wikis can't support 82 people typing at the same time in a document. It can support one person making a change at a time, right? And I think we don't dog food it because it doesn't even meet our own needs. And so, you know, there was a thread recently, there was an issue open recently to move the handbook to a wiki, and there was a resounding no from most people at GitLab because the wiki doesn't support even our own needs currently. And so I think that's a lot of the place that we have to go and start examining what are the things to even start getting it used internally. This was the same thing that happened with search, right? We had to start using it internally to figure out how to make it better. And so we've got to find some use cases where we can go use this internally to get groups onto it. And real-time collaboration is a big one of our use cases for documents. And so without solving that, it's going to be hard, I think, for us to dog food it.
Thank you, Kai, for that answer. Sid, I think you have the next question. You want to verbalize that?
Yeah, thanks. So we have a functionality called WIP work in progress on merge request. And I think it's a confusing name because it doesn't mean that you're working on that merge request. It means, hey, don't merge this because the world will be way worse if we do that early. We're now introducing a work in progress limit on Kanban boards. So we're going to use WIP for its true meaning, namely, I'm working on this. And I find that everyone new to GitLab tends to not set this correctly. Like they mark everything work in progress because that's what it is a work in progress. But most of the time they don't actually need that lock. And it ends up with kind of people being sent merge requests that they then have to unlock, which kind of, if you do that standard, then there's no value to the lock. So I think we misnamed something. And I think it's great that we introduced it to the industry, but we should also be leading the industry in fixing it and call it a merge request lock, which it is, instead of this super confusing name that gets misused by a lot of people. And that misuse is going to increase if we also use work in progress for what it's meant to be, a work in progress limit.
I'll reply to part of that, given that work in progress merge requests sort of in the code review area. I think that's a really good point about the naming, and we definitely need to solve that. I wasn't aware until this point that we were going to name another feature the same thing as WIP, so I'll need to look into that with more detail. I mean, I guess I don't have anything specific to add except that I'll go away and talk to some customers and do some investigation, but would agree that we need to lead in this regard. I think one interesting thing I observed just the other day was with relation to forks and WIP merge requests and thinking about other kinds of workflows where we've got a lot of workflows that generate empty merge requests really easily. And I've been thinking about like whether that's useful to put them out there and like how can we, I don't know, put merge requests in front of the right people at the right time. Like if it's WIP, like should those be filtered by default and helping people find the right merge requests that are ready for review? So I think some of your points around naming and relate to that and finding a good name for those.
Yeah, I think if we nail the name better, then we can also start using it. But right now, like people are sending WIP merge requests to me, like, hey, Sidki, merge this. Still WIP. Yeah, it's still in progress until you merge it. Yes, that is literally true. But now, like even I made this remark in the doc, and someone thought I wanted to replace the Kanban feature, rename the Kanban feature. Like even when we're discussing the problem of the name with, I think, ample explanation, still then we are confused. And that's not due to the people in this call. That's just, we misnamed something and we should fix it.
I do wonder how widely this feature should even be used, because I mean, it strikes me that like if you've opened a merge request and you're wanting discussion, like if everyone who's got approval power thinks it's good enough to merge, like why should it even be obstructed from merging?
Exactly. It's totally overused. Like 9 out of 10 times it's used, it shouldn't be used.
Yeah. There's a bunch of, I guess like these are more like esoteric Git features, but there's a bunch of like things like fix up commits and auto squash sort of syntax supported in Git. And we automatically mark a merge request as WIP when those things are in place, which I think is a really good thing that we block it when those things are detected. But I just wonder if there's like a more, like there should be an explicit way to do this, but I wonder if we can dial it back and just make it much more intelligent around like when it even appears and come with a more.
There's enhancing it, which I'm not against, but let's focus on the biggest problem, and it's super cheap to solve first, and let's get that out there before we release a new feature, which will add to the confusion. So let's do that first. You said block, that's also interesting. So merge request block, merge request lock. I think those are interesting names.
Cool, awesome. In the essence of time, we have one last question. Kenny, do you want to verbalize? And Jeremy, do you want to give a response very quickly?
Yeah, and Jeremy, thank you for answering asynchronously. So my question was, in looking at the category maturities in manage, authentication and authorization, we're kind of like stagnant, not to use a pejorative term, but like at complete for some time. And I was wondering if we had plans to get them to lovable. And Jeremy gave a lot of response. So Jeremy, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Kenny. I think that's a great question. So we'll work on getting a level more specifically defined, but at a high level, I think that auth is generally an area for us to be a little bit reactive to what customers are looking for. So I'm, in the process of, so like that's we see that in areas like smart card, for instance, which is something that's really important to like folks in like the public sector for us to be able to support. I think that the main problem for us to solve for lovability is to really like solve that gap that's kind of between self-managed and GitLab.com, where self-managed has like LDAP and SAML-based capabilities that like just don't exist on GitLab.com. So we need to resolve that gap and make sure that onboarding and permissions management remains something that you can automate very easily with things like LDAP group synced on both on .com, as well as we're providing like strong SCIM support, so that if you're an enterprise, like getting folks into the product and mapping them to the permissions that they need is just super, super easy. I think the other challenge that I wanted to call out is that one thing that we see, especially for GitLab.com, is that we can't assert that enterprises want to be able to assert control over users, and we introduced a feature called group managed accounts. I think in 12.2 to be able to solve for this temporarily, but what we need to do in order to move to livability is actually be able to namespace kind of an area of an instance to be able to say like this user only belongs to this area, and they actually can't, when they expose, so there's no risk of them exposing like a personal project or something or something sensitive to the rest of the instance. So I think in order for us to get to livability, we need to kind of solve for that scope of problem set, which is being able to namespace a user to a specific area of the instance, and then supporting a wide variety of auth strategies so that you can onboard an employee very easily and then scope what they can do to that area of GitLab. And I think that once we accomplish that, we'll have a very strong solution there.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you, everyone, for the great questions. We're at time. Have a great day.